I'd like to welcome you to this meeting to learn about stream management and watershed management plans with presentations by the Colorado Ag Water Alliance and the Colorado Cattlemen's Association's Ag Water Network. I'm Linda Poole. I'm with the San Isabel Land Protection Trust. And just kind of starting with the housekeeping, if anybody wants to order a meal, that's fine. You can go order in the front and have them deliver it to you. That's on your own ticket, but we do have cookies and coffee and water to share for free over there, so please help yourselves. Because we've brought people from so far and they have a lot of in-depth information to cover while they're here, we are going to ask people to hold all their questions and comments until the end of this meeting. And on the end of each of your tables, there's some little 3x5 cards, which will make Gary Taylor smile. 3x5 cards and pens. And so if you come up with a question or a comment, please write those down on the cards and get them either to me or to Janet. This is Janet Smith with San Isabel Land Protection Trust. We will collect those cards, and at the end of the presentations, then we will have a time to ask those questions. Be sure when you're writing your questions or comments, you indicate whether you want to talk with Phil or with Greg. You'll need them just a little bit longer. So I hope that that will be a good way for us to be able to get the full presentations out and still be able to ask questions. San Isabel Land Protection Trust, why would we be here talking about water? We're 25 years old this year, having our birthday, quarter century old. And our mission at this point is still the same as it has always been, and that's to work with private landowners to protect land, water, wildlife, and scenic beauty in Custer, Fremont, Huerfano, and western Pueblo counties. Up until now, most of our work has been done through conservation easements, but we're evolving with time, and we've got some exciting new programs where we're going to be working more and more with private landowners, whether we have easements with them or not, on what we call land care. So things like wildfire mitigation, flood recovery, erosion and weed control, grazing management practices, forestry practices, and things like that. We're especially interested in ways to bring young people back into our communities and into agriculture specifically. And when we're a conservation group, why would we want to do that? Why do we care about bringing young people back and strengthening sustainable agriculture? And that's because sustainable agriculture is the foundation of conservation here. That's why this place is as special as it is. It's not going to stay the way that it is without continued attention of the stewards of the land. And San Isabel sees that it's especially important for us to start to work on that with the ranchers who are here, the proven land stewards, so that we can together protect this landscape for generations to come. Water is definitely at the forefront of our minds. A lot of us spent a couple, 2 or 3 hours in the same room last night talking about the water augmentation plan from the Upper Ark Water Conservancy District, and that's really important, and that is not what we're talking about tonight. So people who want to interact on that, please remember the county commissioners meeting that they're going to have here 6:30 on Monday. Is that right, Tom? Yeah, and that'll be a kind of a workshop where the community can talk about that AUG plan. But again, that's not what we're going to talk about directly today. The interlink between the two, though, is that whoever controls the water controls the future of this community. It's just as clear as anything could be. Water is the limiting factor in this community, whether you're talking about economic development or environmental conservation or the future of young people in this community. And so what we want to do tonight is to talk about, learn from a couple experts about how communities, especially ag communities, have been able to step to the front of planning their water futures. What are the options that instead of always being the recipient of somebody else's plan, this is the third AUG plan that's been run by this community, It's going to keep happening. Is there an alternative? Are there ways that ag communities can work together to plan in a way for the sustainable future of the people and nature and wildlife and livestock, and especially for water? And so what we have tonight is we have Greg Peterson with the Colorado Ag Water Alliance. Greg is a Colorado native, lives in Littleton. He's been with the Colorado Ag Water Alliance for 3 years. After his presentation, we'll have Phil Brink with the Colorado Cattlemen's Association's Ag Water Network. Phil has a consulting business on the side. He provides environmental compliance and conservation assistance to the livestock industry, particularly through CAFOs and AFOs, confined animal feedlot type operations. Phil is also an NRCS certified technical service provider. Okay, just as we get going, I want to remind you again, please hold all of your comments and questions, write them down on the note cards. If you don't have enough note cards, steal some more off another table, we'll get them for you. We do want to answer your questions, but we'll wait until the end of the presentation for that. So with this, we'll start with Greg. I'm going the wrong way. Sorry.
All right. Thank you so much. Okay, everybody can hear me? All right, I'm just going to set this clock so I don't run too far over. Thank you for having me here. My name's Greg Peterson. I'm with the Colorado Ag Water Alliance. If you could just hit that real quickly. So, what is the Colorado Ag Water Alliance? We're an association of all these different organizations from around the state. I have a board member. I have one voting board member, but usually 2 members from every one of these organizations comes to my board meetings. And we have a producer member that votes and often the executive director of each of these organizations. And our purpose is focusing on water education and outreach. And do that with 2 different communities. Either go around and travel around the state and talk to farmers and ranchers about what's going on in water policy, water administration, water projects, or talking to people outside of the ag community about, and talking with legislators, people who work for state agencies, and talking about, well, what are farmers and ranchers doing with water? Why are they making the choices that they are? And just continuing to shed light on how they're putting that water to use and the benefits that it's providing for the rest of us. So that's just a little background to who we are and what I'm doing. And if I just wanted to get into this today, who's heard of the term stream management plan? Who's heard of that? It's a terrible name, I know. Don't worry, I didn't make it, so don't worry. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to say stream management plan a lot. I know Phil. You'll probably say watershed management plan. We'll get into the naming is not that important. We'll get into that. So there's some written about what are stream management plans, and this is straight from the Colorado Water Plan. So the Colorado Water Plan calls for stream management plans, or SMPs, for 80% of locally prioritized rivers in Colorado. A stream management plan uses biological, hydrological, geomorphological or physical, and other data to assess the flows or other physical conditions that are needed to support collaboratively identified environmental or recreational values. So you have these plans where you're going out and getting a lot of data analysis and capturing a lot of data. And then the second part of that, which is identifying environmental and recreational values. So, but it mentions that we want a diverse set of stakeholders when we're coming up with these stream management plans. That includes special districts, private landowners, businesses, citizens, agricultural interests. So this can seem like an odd fit, where we have a process, and we use the word plan, but in some ways it almost is more like a committee, and these are not enforcement committees at all. And you have this emphasis on environmental and recreational, but at the same time you emphasize having wide stakeholder outreach with people outside of the recreational environmental communities. So there's a few things of really Sorry, just getting some bad feedback there. So there's a few, what can a stream management plan do? And what is this? We get a lot of this data. Oh. No, I think we're good. So we have this large data analysis, and then we're also setting these goals, these recreational and environmental goals. And you do this by establishing a stakeholder group, the large data analysis, and what these are able to do, and what we've seen them do to different degrees, is they attract funding for these projects. And it's similar to the way that the Basin Roundtables work, if you're familiar with those, that they can set and prioritize projects, and then with those projects, they can find funding for them. So if you want to, and part of that they're able to attract funding for projects is this magic buzzword here, multi-beneficial projects. That's becoming a pretty popular phrase nowadays in the water world, where projects that not only have a benefit for one set of water users, whether it's municipal or industrial or environmental or recreational or agricultural, but when projects start having benefits for multiple sets of users. And then what these stream management plans do, they also include often organizations with resources. And when I say that, I really mean it's a lot of people in the ag community that I know don't have their own grant writers. They don't have staff for administrating grants. And that often these stream management plans, they involve organizations that have experience handling grants. So you get a little bit of an infrastructure there. And landowner involvement. That is something that is incredibly attractive to a lot of grant programs, is finding projects that actually have landowners, because for a lot of these projects to even be successful, you need people who own land and water rights. You can write, and I will go through some of these plans, that there are plans that have been written and they are going to sit on a shelf, and not much has happened with them, and and something may happen with them, but other parts of their outreach has not ensured that they have the support within the local landowner community to carry through with that plan. So what's in a name? I just want to get through this. These are all actual names of different stream management plans around the state. You've got Watershed Management Plan, River Envisioning Project, that's a new one, Community River Plan. You've got all these different names, and I think to a certain degree a name matters. I think a one that really sticks out here that's important right up here is the drought contingency planning. This is the Mancos Conservation District. They're actually really looking into how are changes in flows really going to affect the way that agriculturally we operate out here, and especially changes during drought. So that really, for certain purposes, the name can really mean a lot. I mean, if you have environmental and recreational needs assessment, I'm sure we can all assume what the focus of that plan is. And so you're going to hear stream management plan, you're going to hear integrated water management plan, you can hear watershed plan. So the names, I don't want to say that the name isn't, there is some value in the name, but you can also see that there's quite a few different names you can put on this. So I'm going to first talk about, just to give an idea of what some of these even are and what can happen, is there's a lot of leeway with stream management plans. And I think there's a good, and that's good and bad. You can really create these plans that are adapted to local needs. It also means that there's not a lot of guardrails or really a lot of requirements for what some of these need to include. And some of them can be very straightforward and direct. And so this first plan that I want to get into, the Crystal River Management Plan, Crystal River near Carbondale, Colorado. So if you want to hit that one time. So there was a Roaring Fork Conservancy environmental organization wanted to... Who here's familiar with the Crystal River? Who's ever seen that? So Crystal River flows right into the Roaring Fork. And often later in the year, in August, September, there's some dry up there. And environmental organization, what they really wanted to do was increase the stream flow at the confluence of the Crystal and Roaring Fork rivers. And they went out and they engaged the irrigators and, well, how much water do you need? And the number that was getting thrown around at first was 100 CFS, but where did that number come from? So the irrigators will go figure out how much water you'd actually need and then come back to us. And so the Crystal River Management Plan came out of that. And there's a lot of information in here. They went through. This was actually water demand shortages for each ditch throughout the year, and I thought that's something that I thought was actually pretty valuable information that they didn't do much with. But they also went through and just looked what's going on in terms of water quality, woody debris, the sediment. Just physically what is going on with this entire river system. And there's a lot of really valuable data there. If you want to flip that again, they're also looking at, I pulled out, well, when are demand shortages on certain ditches? So there was a lot of good information that they got from this. And again, but they had a goal in mind, and I think that goal really set what their outcomes were and what they came away from that. So if you want to hit it, they came up with a few different ideas of, well, we could put in inset channels to maybe help with the stream flow. We can maybe have off-channel storage. Irrigation efficiency was something they thought about, changing from flood to sprinkler and modeling that and computer modeling, lining certain ditches. But what they actually came to is and it was what they were originally thinking, is leasing water. And leasing water, and when I say this, I mean in a voluntary, compensated, temporary program. And this gentleman here, Bill Fales, he's a rancher up there in Carbondale. And they came to an agreement. Now that they had all this data and they had a number, they could actually say, well, actually, Mr. Fales, when the water in the Crystal River reaches 45 CFS, that's when we need more water in the stream. And now we have done this data to prove, and we've done this research to prove, that now adding water to the stream will have an environmental benefit, that it's actually worthwhile to put extra water in the stream. And so they actually set up an arrangement with Mr. Fales where if the Crystal River reaches 40 CFS, my mistake, he can choose to divert less water. And for every CFS, and what it is it's $175 per CFS, he chooses to divert less. And there was a few guardrails on this, that it can only be for a maximum of 20 days in the months of August and September. This past year, there was so little water in the Crystal River, nobody even wanted to do this deal. But this is a good example of what one stream management plan has done. And I mean, they had a very defined goal, and this is the outcome that they had with it. I think what's from our perspective is that there's a real big missed opportunity here. Is that, and I'm going to go through that with some of these other stream management plans that did something that that this one did not do. And so when I bring up this plan and mention it, some of the supporters, they've said, well, the whole purpose was just to fill water at one point in the stream. And well, yeah, they're correct. But there was nobody went out and on to these landowners' properties and asked, well, what's going on with your systems? What are your problems? What are your needs? And there's a lot of missed opportunities. And so I think going forward with here, I mean, they found one irrigator who might work with them, but that's all that they found. They've really limited themselves with what getting this data can do. And so if we can just jump to the next one. So there are actually quite a few stream management plans all over the state that have begun. Most of them on the western slope. You'll notice that there actually isn't any in the larger Arkansas River Basin. So what is the role for ag in all of these plans? So about 2 years ago, I started hearing about stream management plans from irrigators, and it was, what's going on in my river basin? I have no clue what this is, and I had no clue what this was. And so I've been going around and talking with irrigators or people involved in these plans, people who are supporting these plans, just trying to have a better understanding of what these are, because they're all different. And one of the things that I've come away from this is that the successful plans, and I believe they're successful because they included the ag community. And that doesn't mean just having the ag community show up at meetings. That means actually taking in time and understanding what do they need in terms of projects, infrastructure, what do they actually want done. And so that's something that often they own a majority of the water rights in an area. This is something that I've expressed many times is these plans, I mean, it's you're talking about other people's water. And often, I mean, it's easy to talk about, but and then so I think what needs to be stated, and you mentioned this earlier, is that agriculture already provides so many benefits to people who have environmental and recreational values. Your farms and ranches are our open space. There are scenic views. There are habitat. There are playground. And I think enhancing and documenting that and maintaining that already your lifestyle is doing something that benefits us environmentally and recreationally. I live in a townhouse in Littleton. Nobody's taking pictures of my house. There's no mountain biking. There's no hiking. I mean, it does not provide the same benefits that your lifestyle provides. And I think that's something that needs to be taken into account and not forgotten, because I think when we lose ag, we're all going to lose something that most people in this state, I think, value. So what can stream management plans do for ag? I'm going to get into a few examples, but so the biggest thing is leveraging funding for infrastructure projects. And this can range anywhere from a new $5,000 flume to $1.5 million irrigation new diversion structure. This can be reconstruction of the river. There's significant projects that can be done. Go back. And I'm sure in most places of most places in the state, the infrastructure is getting a bit old, and it is not cheap, and it is hard. And even if there is CWCB funding, it's hard to find matching funds. And so this is a way to help cost share that. So addressing a larger river-wide issue. Seen this actually starting to take place in a few places. I'll get into one here they did in Grand County with low flows. Up in northwestern Colorado, they have a pretty bad algae issue on the White River. So much so they're calling it the Green River. And they're actually looking into, can this stream management plan and the data that we get from this help us fund projects that can get rid of this algae? Because it's gotten to the point where it's just mucking up everybody's diversion structures and pumping structures. So where that can address an issue that's much more than just one irrigator. And then the other is, and I didn't think about this at first, but a gentleman I know, his name's Bill Trampy. He's a rancher up in the Gunnison, and he's involved in a stream management plan there. And he said, I don't know if we're going to get new infrastructure. I don't know if it's going to save ag. But I know that it's going to give me an opportunity to tell everybody else at the table just how important we are and what we do. And I think that's understated how important that is, especially when these projects bring people who are in the environmental and recreational communities. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how farmers and ranchers use water. And there's a lot of misunderstandings about the value of return flows, or just why you're using a certain type of irrigation, or why you grow what you grow, and that it provides a great opportunity to really educate more people just about why farmers and ranchers are doing what they're doing. I think for a lot of us who do not grow up directly on a farm or ranch, there's a lot of mystery around that, and so these opportunities I think can really help that. So I'm going to just talk about a couple different plans here that are either incorporating the ag community well, or they're even just being led by members in the ag community. And so that first example I told you about the Crystal River, these are all very different. And I want you to keep in mind that all these plants, they can be different. And it really depends on who's driving the bus. So first one, Upper Gunnison. So the Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy District is the one managing the grant. They're the one managing the stakeholder groups. And so they are managing this project. Area where irrigation is flood irrigation. This mimics a lot of natural processes. They've limited upstream shortages. They have a lot of problems when there's low water. And so what they've done is Upper Gunnison is in a large area, is they've separated how they're doing their stream management plan regionally, but it's not just regionally, it's also kind of separated by values. So you have Ohio Creek, which they've been working on. Ohio Creek is almost entirely agricultural. I think the number I heard is there's like 60% of the farms there, or 60% of the land there is under conservation easements. I mean, this is an area that is ag and will continue to be ag. There's some fishing, but not a lot. So they actually have they have a coordinator for each of these areas. Up there, his name's Jesse Kruthopt, and he's from Tomichi Creek, and he grew up on a ranch there, and he's the coordinator for Ohio Creek. So they have a local person who has a local background who is also and understands that community. Over on the East and Taylor rivers, I mean, there isn't as much agriculture there. It's very much environmental and rec, and they have a representative from those communities who is the coordinator for that. And this is something that they say has worked out really well for them, is separating it that way. So, for example, like this is Ohio Creek, and what they're looking at right now is they've done their data analysis. They're getting all their data together. They've done one pilot project, which I'll show, but they're also trying to look at what other opportunities are here. And one of them is, are there better ways that we can divert water amongst ourselves to maybe put off a call downstream? And this is one that they're not sure what they'll find from that, but just because of so many irrigators in Ohio Creek, and the call that it's the Gunnison Tunnel call. It's not a major call, but and they're thinking, yeah, we might only be able to put it off by like a week, but that's significant for a lot of them. And so now that they have that data, and I'm not an engineer. I can look at computer models and I understand how they work. You don't want me coding it, but and when they're going through these and then they can model, well, what happens if you do this and I do that? That's become a pretty valuable tool in itself. And so that's one thing that they're looking at right now. Other big thing is they are looking at getting rid of a lot of these diversion structures. So to put a call on the river, you have to divert water. And quite a few places in the Gunnison, they have push-up dams like these where you run out and you get equipment, run into the stream, and push that up. And so they've got a couple others. And this is one thing where, from an agricultural standpoint, I mean, you might own the equipment, or you're renting equipment every year. You're going in there every year into the stream and pushing up dams. And then you can also see from an environmental and rec standpoint that this is probably there's probably a better way to do this from their perspectives. So this is what they've seen as a real low-hanging fruit for them. And they did this already, and this was one of their pilot projects. And so through the stream management plan, the irrigator on this ditch didn't actually have to pay for any of the cost. I think this cost them just about, I think it was about $400,000. And so historically, this is how the Teach Out Fairchild ditch works. And so you can see right here, this is the actual creek, and they've just pushed and covered all that. And then now they've changed that quite a bit. So here is the diversion structure. You actually have a continuously flowing creek now. And what's important is that stream management plan, it now shows that yes, having a better head gate or a better diversion structure, I'm sure we all can look at that and say, yes, that is better for the health of the stream. But now you have that data that proves it, and because you have that data, you can get it funded, which was pretty significant for them. So Another one that's been going on, and infrastructure has been a big part of this, is in the Rio Grande. So you have the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District and the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project. And their stream management plan is actually covering the entire Rio Grande watershed. So a pretty large area. And I think they're actually going to include the Conejos watershed soon. So they cover it. This is a pretty large project. And they've got a lot of issues going on. In terms of infrastructure, you have a lot of sediment and debris, a lot of poorly functioning, high maintenance infrastructure. In terms of the health of the river, lots of erosion, degraded habitat, impaired water quality. And so this is a great example of certain parts that you'll see in the Rio Grande and how they've been able to address that. So same area, same spot. Okay, yeah, we can go back and forth. Okay, and then the next one. So this is the Prairie Ditch Diversion, and again, just similar to what you saw in the Upper Gunnison. I mean, they're going out here. This is there's actually some chunks of, I think it was of an old World War II boat that they use up. They get pretty creative with how they divert water around there, and they push all this up, and so again, you can see for I think most irrigators, they would say, okay, this is not the best working structure. We got to rent a backhoe every year. We need to go back in here. We have to make sure that we actually curtail the river, and they've got a new structure. And so this one, it's got a couple things that's nice. You can't see the ditch. The head gate is now a bit off to the right, but they have this low flow channel here, which is really nice for them because in years past, they've just got so much trash and sediment that gets sent down their ditch because when they've curtailed the entire thing. And now a lot of that just goes down through that low flow channel. So that's been a big help in just terms of sediment and trash. But also they've gone from, and not this ditch specific, so if you want to go to the next one, they call it their 5-ditch project. And they're actually, one of the really small ditches, the Pace ditch is really small too. I think the consolidated ditch, which I think is about a $1.6 million project, and they're replacing each of these diversion structures. So the Centennial ditch is one that they've also done, and I met the gentleman who's down on that. His name Greg Heigl, and he's a farmer rancher down in Alamosa. And in years past, they tie a rope around Greg, and he goes out and wades into the stream, and he inserts these wooden slats, and that's how they've diverted water on their structure. And he probably had to go out to that. He had to go out there at least, he was telling me, at least 3-4 times a week out to their diversion structure. And it was a lot of work from that standpoint. They were getting tons of sediment brought in there. They also, the diurnal flow of the Rio Grande was really messing quite a bit, and so that was affecting what was going in and out of their ditch too. And they are one of the last major diversions. So also on the Rio Grande, you have you have a compact right of what is required to go across the border. And in years past, how it's always worked is they have to make sure that they're letting a certain amount of water go by for that compact right, and that's been quite difficult to manage around and having to go out there. And now they have an automated head gate, and that's a pretty easy process compared to years past. So when they originally looked, they thought this was going to be about $1.5 million, and it turned out to be about $600,000. And they didn't even pay all of that. And that's what is because with that data that they've got from their stream management plan showing that, if you go from this rip-rap dam to an actual channel dam with a low flow, there's an environmental benefit to this. And that brought organizations like the Rio Grande Headwaters Association who are able to bring more funding to address those kinds of problems. So the last one I want to get into, this one is up in Grand County. And so Grand County, back in early 2000s, they actually did a stream management plan. And they did this, and it was relating to northern water and Denver water, and water that was actually being brought across the Continental Divide for their systems from rivers in Grand County. And so they created this stream management plan because it was kind of seen as a maybe leverage or to really hold so that they can document the health of their streams, and that if there were increased diversions across the Continental Divide, they could then document, you are hurting our streams. And so they created this plan, and what I think was interesting about this is, if you can go to the next one, there's some other things that were going on prior to this plan, though. So in Senate Document 80, this all authorized the Colorado Big Thompson Project. And there's a group of irrigators near Kremling. For years, they relied on these these early season floods to irrigate. They actually didn't have adjudicated water rights. And so this Senate Document 80, it gave them a fancy name, ILVK, Irrigators in the Lands Vicinity of Kremling, and they were then assigned these rights that were associated to this project because there were going to be much less flows in the Colorado River. And so then back to the stream management plan. I mean, the stream management plan in Grand County, I mean, it's environmental target flows. Nothing in here is about agriculture. If you want to go to the next one. They mention one thing about irrigators. They have some difficulty in retrieving using water, especially during recent drought years. They're making makeshift cobble dams. Some pump intakes must be cleaned daily. So the stream management plan didn't include that much about agriculture. And so I want you to keep in mind that, okay, we have this pre-existing stream management plan, and then we have this group of irrigators who historically they've relied on these floods, and then and in that Senate bill, they had these pump stations built for them so that they continue pumping across water from the Colorado River. And then the next one, and then you also have a lot of other problems going on. You've got some pretty rough erosion there. You've got a car holding up that part of the stream bank. Here's a great example you can see of, there's an irrigation ditch running through there, and this is 2005, and then now they've had so much erosion that's disappeared. And then, okay, so back to those pumps that these irrigators are using. This is the intake for one of those pumps, and you've got less water flowing in the Colorado River with transmountain diversions. And what would often happen is then their pumps are running dry, and they're not running as efficiently. And then, so again, now we have some pretty serious erosion going on too. Here's part of the Colorado River where it's about a bit over 200 feet wide, and again, those depletions in those flows, they're dealing with a river that's been changing a lot and having to adapt to that. And this says it better than anything. Their estimated historic flow compared to future conditions of how much CFS is going to be flowing through that area. And this is the reality of what those irrigators are what they're dealing with and what they're trying to prepare for. And how do you do that? So this gentleman right there, his name's Paul Bruchet. He's a fifth generation rancher up in Kremling, and he is one of the irrigators in the lands in the vicinity of Kremling. His family is. There's 13 families up there. And what they decided was that this isn't working. We've got a lot of problems with erosion. Our pumps are running dry. Every now and then you'd have northern water would come out and repair their pumps. And so what they did is, they took this stream management plan that Grand County had done, and all this data that had been in there. And so building off of that, they actually, and if you can go to the next one, they did this assessment. And just for a part of the river that's running around really Kremling and their areas, and they were looking at erosion, they were looking at these pumps, and this was and also some of the diversion structures. And they learned a lot about the river. And one interesting thing that Paul said that he never realized is, you look at this part of the Colorado River, there's Kremling right there. So right here, there actually used to be an oxbow in the river. And you had one industrious landowner about 115 years ago actually just cut that off. And what that had been doing that none of them realized was that was increasing the velocity in the river so much that that was really contributing to a lot of the erosion. And this was I was really surprised. I do not understand river mechanics well enough, as much as I need to. And so this was a really big surprise for a lot of them, and started answering some of their questions of why is a river eating itself at the rate that it is? And you have parts where you have this incision in the river. I think at one point it's like 22 feet. And that's also, as this river's going down, this is affecting their pumps. So one of the things that the projects that they start putting together are riffles. And so they start creating these artificial riffles, and they're able to get these funded through part of their own money as Matt, but a lot of money through the stream management plan process was also to bring in money. And so they use riprap, and they have a cement base on these riffles, and they do two things: is they provide habitat for macroinvertebrates, but they also help raise the water level with pumping. So this is just a diagram of what those riffles look like, those artificial riffles. And there's another one that they built. So that pump that wasn't quite working at that efficiently now looks like that. And so this has been a big improvement for them. And they're also getting a lot more macroinvertebrates. They're also getting more fish, and which is also a big part of that Colorado River is recreation. And so a lot of this funding has come. And so here's that part of you can see a lot of that erosion that's been happening. Some of their plans of putting some root wads in there, and they've been able to work on that a little bit more. The next one, okay, they've even been building these wood matrices, which are, again, there's a lot of mechanics to this stream restoration that I think people in the past have focused on. Well, let's build pools for fish habitat, and that's fine and all, but there's also a lot of tools here that can help these working rivers continue to be working rivers. And so the next one, this is actually where that overhead picture of that ditch went missing from erosion. And they actually built in, and they use this giant tree, and they're trying to rebuild that entire that area there so they can put that ditch back. And so this area here, that's where those 13 families and the irrigators in the lands of vicinity of Kremling are. And their work is actually part of become part of a larger project where they're affecting over 20 miles of river, along with the Windy Gap bypass further upstream and Colorado Parks and Wildlife Restoration Project. But they are a significant force in really reconstructing their part of the river, and it's been a pretty big benefit to them. I mean, it's not just been erosion and pumping stations. They're starting to do diversion structures. One person's putting in a sprinkler, and this has been, and a lot of this has been funded through this stream management plan and been pulling. And so they were able to pull in a bit over $7 million from the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. $2 million of that just went to these riffle and erosion projects. About $5 million of that went to this bypass project further upstream. So this has been a significant financial windfall, more than I think any other stream management plan I've run across. They've been able to really leverage this for a lot of funding. So I'm going to go through this part. I included this today. I wasn't sure how much I wanted to get into the weeds on this, but I needed to include this. I'm mentioning modeling and getting all this data. And what's something that's been common with a lot of these ones that I've given examples, but also others, is you start getting this working model of the agricultural water rights in an area. And that itself is just an incredibly valuable tool. And so the state, it already has this system, the Colorado Decision Support System. And it's about 80% there. I mean, it doesn't have every single detail, but it has a lot of the details for most areas in the state. And in these plans, they went through, they went with that database in certain areas like the Upper Gunnison, and they worked with local water commissioners and irrigators to kind of fill out that last 20% of that database. And so you've got what's called hydrobase, and then you have GIS maps, and then you also have state CU, which is a consumptive use model for finding consumptive use, and also a water rights allocation model. And this model has allowed them to play with quite a few things when they're going through this process. And so it has water rights tabulation, includes diversion records. All of this is included in it, and this is all, everybody has access to this online. I mean, you can go and look this up right now. Reservoir storage releases, climate data, GIS, every diversion on there, they don't mark the irrigated area, but they do have an estimate of the acreage. So using this tool and the crop analysis tool, you can really start doing quite a bit with estimating crop irrigation requirements and figuring out, well, what's the difference, what can happen in a dry year and a wet year, what happens when you start changing irrigation efficiencies. And so this is a really good example. I like this one of, a few of these are from the White River Basin. And using this model, you can start finding, well, actual consumptive use in certain areas and finding, okay, what of that is actually from surface water rights, what of that is from storage. And again, this might not be perfectly accurate data, but going through this process, and especially in the Upper Gunnison, they've been going with landowners trying to be like, is this correct? Is this actually what's happening on your farms and ranches? So same thing for a dry year. And they've been able to document, well, how much of this water is actually being stored in your soil? Because I think that's something, especially in irrigated meadows, I think that's something that's easily taken for granted, is just how important that soil profile is. And they're able to do this. So I think, and so this is a really great tool that has come up. And you can find out, well, why are there certain shortages? That you can model calls on the river. It's a pretty impressive model tool that they have. So this is just looking at comparing natural flows to gauge flows, and let's go to this next one real quick. So here is a certain part of the white, what you can see right here is that disparity, that change, that's that late season return flows from those irrigated meadows. And I think in most places in the state, I mean, you go and you can say, yes, those flood irrigated meadows, those help with those return flows. Now you actually have that documentation. Now you actually have that data. I mean, because we built an entire system around that. Not only do other water rights users, but recreational users use those. Habitat has built itself around that. And now you have that, and that's a really important tool to have. So we can figure out when and where is water available compared to demand. How much do we have in dry years compared to wet years? What's going on if certain rights are sold? How does that affect the whole? So this is not a part of every stream management plan. That's one thing I want to be clear. They did not do this in the Crystal River, but this can be a part of stream. And I think this is, even if you're not doing a stream management plan, I think really trying to go through and have some of this, a better understanding of how ag water rights work and interact with each other in an area can really help if you want to line a ditch. Well, I think most people understand that, well, that can affect seepage, that can affect return flows. But when you start going through this process, you can actually model and have a much better idea of what that will do in real life. So I want to just finish up. Let's just go through. So just a thing to think about with stream management plans. Prior appropriation is our system. It's worked for us. It will continue to work for us. And stream management plans can work within that system, and they should work within that system. And we should not go outside of the prior appropriation system. If you're a farmer or rancher and you want to be a part of a stream management plan, chances are you'll be the only person there who's not being paid to be there. Especially if there's environmental rec organizations. And this seems like a small sticking point, but I can mention some where this is the issue of, well, we want the farmers and ranchers to show up. Stop hosting meetings at 2 in the afternoon during the summer. But they don't get any further than that. But this is something is for those people who aren't in the ag community. I'll say it again: the success of your plan is going to depend on whether or not you have ag people involved. It really will. And so if that means meeting on their property, if that means showing up at their house, well, if they want you to show up at their house, but that means really planning around their schedule, and they are busy people. And that's something that you need to keep in mind. Make sure that the statement of work includes efforts to understand agricultural interactions. And what I mean by that is not only does what's going on between one farm and ranch and the river in terms of the water, but what's going on between all these these farms and ranches and water. This is really important information, and a lot of these places are interconnected. So, assured that both the impacts and benefits, so those late season return flows, your flood irrigation, those what people see as inefficiencies in a lot of areas, that's habitat. There are values to this. Make sure there's an understanding of the purpose of current irrigation practices. I think the Upper Gunnison is a great example of this, as they have this cobbly substrate underneath a lot of their irrigated pastures. They have to put a lot of water on there, and it really makes sense. When you start going through there, and so people it's like, well, why are you doing all this? And going through that and actually modeling and showing, well, they know what they're doing, and then having the data to help you, and then have input on the consultant team and the basin coordinator. Some of these stream management plans are really large. Some are pretty small, but I'm sure that if you're a farmer and rancher, I would be surprised if you have an extra 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week to work on a stream management plan. But really getting to, and one of the nice things is that there is a significant amount of resources for these plans. That certain plans, they fund new jobs. There are coordinators just for specific plans, and making sure that someone who understands the ag community, I think, is really important. Especially your local ag community. Every time I think I start knowing how a farm or ranch works, I go to a different one and I'm proven wrong. And they're just so complex, and just understanding the different rights between each user and just how the system has worked for a period of years. That's really valuable knowledge. So if you want to hit that last one. So on our website, we've got, there's not a great resource online that describes all these different plans. On our website, we've got the applications and finished reports to plans that have finished them. And if you really enjoy reading through grant applications, they're on there. But even if you don't, just that first page that has the scope of work, that gives you a good idea of which ones are similar, which ones are different. And I think I just want to, from what you've seen here today, maybe I've given you examples that these are all pretty different. And just like that first example I showed you, they can make a stream management plan that doesn't really include the needs of irrigators, and that can happen. And I think it's not an effective way to go, and it's not going to be a very impactful process. But there are some that have really worked well with the local landowners, or the local landowners took it and ran with it, and it's proven pretty significant for them. So I don't know if I took too much time, but I'm just going to stop right there, and I'll pass it on to Phil.
Thank you.
All right. Nice work, Greg. You are a little bit taller than me, so I'll bring this down. I'm going to talk louder. That's okay. 55 minutes, is that what you were aiming for?
I think a little bit slower.
You came in under an hour. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Phil Brink. I'm the consulting coordinator of Colorado Cattlemen's Ag Water Network. The Ag Water Network is an initiative that was created about 3.5 years ago. I'm going to move this over so I can see a little better. out of concern over the increasing loss of irrigated ag land. If you've driven around Colorado, you have seen examples of that, especially where I live along the Front Range. We've seen our share of loss of irrigated ag land. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why we're having this conversation right now, where we are in this moment in time, and the context around that regarding population growth. And I'm also going to talk to you about our 2019 project that we're working on through the Ag Water Network, and then we'll look at a couple of examples. Before I do, though, I just wanted to test your familiarity with your local scenery. So I want you to look at this photograph right here in the very middle of that slide. And I want to know if there's anybody that can identify that mountain that is catching the sunlight, the morning sunlight right there. And I will give you a hint. It's right out your back door. Anybody want to guess, or does anybody know what that mountain is? What I hear? I thought I heard it over here. Crestone Needle. Did I hear Crestone Needle? That is a Crestone Needle.
Yeah.
So these two people that are standing in the photograph beside that mountain are standing on the summit of the Crestone Needle, which is a 14,000 foot plus peak. The person on the left is my lovely wife, Suzanne, which probably means that handsome devil that's got his arm around her must be me. That was about that was about 20 years ago. We're coming up on 21 that we climbed the Needle, the Peak, Kit Carson, and Humboldt, as well as all the rest of the 14ers around the state. We did that in one summer. It was just a goal that we had. So I say all that to say that I've spent a little time down in this valley, and I never have enough excuses to come down here. This is one of my favorite places in Colorado. I just love it. And when Greg and I came in, Greg came with me, and we topped the hill over there. It was just wonderful to see this valley again. It's been quite a while. And it's certainly something worth saving and worth preserving, and I know everybody here probably agrees with that. Okay, on to business. So let's jump on to the next slide, Linda. So as I mentioned, our mission is about keeping ag water with ag land, and we do that in a few different ways. One is through collaboration and education, presentations like today's. We work with organizations like the Colorado Ag Water Alliance. We also provide technical resources. One thing you can do is check our website, agwaternetwork.org, agwaternetwork.org, and I'll mention that again later. And we've got a number of webinars and things that hopefully answer some questions that ag producers have around water-related issues. One of the things that we did was we had a webinar we did with Kevin Ryan. If that name rings a bell, it's because Kevin Ryan is our state engineer with the Division of Water Resources. And we asked him to walk us through what the difference is between conservation and efficiency, and what is waste, and what does that look like. So there's a webinar on there that you can access in the Ag Water Network website that will give you more information and really lays that out. And we do provide some technical assistance with regard to water rights and things around that. Our funding this year is from the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Next slide, please. So, I have another trivia question for you. Does anybody know or want to hazard a guess as to how much our population in Colorado grew last year? Don't be bashful.
3%.
Too much, I heard over here.
3%.
Okay, and let's just go with numbers. Okay, 3%. Can I have a number like X number of thousand? Anybody want to guess? Everybody's afraid of being wrong. Okay. Let's go on to the next slide and I'll show you. Okay, so Denver Post says it's 80,000. And that number is not official. We won't know the official number until the state demographer's office comes out with the number later on this year. They're always delayed. But I've been watching this for years. The Denver Post is usually pretty close, within 1,000 or two, plus or minus. So 80,000 people is what we added last year. That made us the 7th fastest growing state in the nation. We have been higher up in the rankings than that. So it's actually a slight decline. And part of the reason for that is that Colorado's economy was one of the very first ones to come out of the recovery after the crash of 2008. And by the way, former Governor Hickenlooper said that agriculture was one of the main reasons that we came out of our recession as fast and as well as we did. As a result, we became a job magnet, so we attracted a lot of people. And then on top of that, of course, we just have a whole lot of beautiful scenery and a lot of reasons to move here. So we keep getting a lot more people moving in, but that pace has abated just a little bit. Since 2010, we've added 700,000 people. So I think as we look at these numbers, we start getting a sense as to why we're having these conversations about water more and more often, and what the importance of developing a local watershed plan might be. Now, I like to convert things into something that is easy to understand. So we got 80,000 people that we added to our population last year. What does that mean in terms of water? If we figure 100 gallons per person per day, which is kind of an average, if you look at Denver water users are going to use less than that. Some of the suburban folks that have big lawns and whatnot, they're going to be using more than that. So let's just use 100 gallons per person per day. That works out to be, we had our slide, 8 million gallons per day. And if we convert that to acre feet, we're at about 9,000 acre feet per year. So what does that look like if we had to dry up corn? We just had to dry up high value, high production corn. We figure the amount of consumptive use for an acre of corn, this is just irrigation water, and this is just consumptive use, it's not including the amount that the crop had available to it when the season started in the soil or what fell from the sky, but just irrigation water, 1.5 acre foot per acre consumptive use, we would have to dry up about 6,000 acres of corn if that was the only way we could supply water to those 80,000 people. So one way of visualizing that is think about driving down the road, 10 miles. And on your left, you see a wall of corn for that 10 miles. And on your right, you see dry land pasture, maybe some dry land wheat, some other things to dry land. None of it's irrigated. That's what we're talking about losing. And everything that goes along with that, right? So that's why our mission is to try to help provide information about water and water resources and water rights to ag producers so that they can make the very best decisions possible about their ag water rights. Okay, next slide. So here's just a couple of comparisons of population growth. So we're right here at home in Custer County. And Custer County, back in 1970, who was here? Who was living here in 1970? We've got a few folks that have been around for a while. You had 1,131 souls living in Custer, in all of Custer County in 1970. That's bumped up a bit. So now you're above 4,000. And the state demographer's office says you're heading towards about 7,500 by the year 2050. That's, for a guy like me, that's in one of the fastest growing towns in Colorado and one of the fastest growing cities, in fact, in Colorado, which is Erie. That doesn't seem like very many people. But down here, it does seem like a lot of people. And I grew up in a small town, in a very rural community, rural area where we had about 1.5 people per square mile. So I know what that feels like. And then Huerfano County, I included that because that was kind of interesting to me. I'm used to seeing the charts where the trajectory is like this. Huerfano County actually declines, according to the state demographer's office. So if you want to get away from it all, you go south. Next slide. Okay, so we have all these, we have primarily this population growth, which is driving demand, but we do have, we have existing demand. We have irrigation. It's been going on for over 100 years. We have an oil and gas, a very thriving oil and gas industry. They need a little water to do what they're doing. And of course, we have tourism. Last year, I'm not sure I believe this number, but according to the Denver Post citing the Tourism Bureau, we had about 83 million visitors here last year in Colorado. About 1 million of those, they said, were foreign, and the rest were domestic. That generated, again, according to the Tourism Bureau, almost $1.3 billion in revenue to our state coffers. So the point is that the tourism and the recreation industry are growing. That means that, and while they're nowhere close to agriculture in terms of the amount of the gross domestic product or the amount of tax revenue they generate, they're growing, and so their voice is growing. And they have water needs. And then finally, aquatic life. We all like to fish. We all like to go down to the creek and, mess around and just even take a hike by a creek. We see that as valuable for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is watering elk and deer and other types of wildlife and providing a source of water for them. So we have all these uses, and that demand is increasing, but we have a finite supply. So what does this set us up for? Conflict. So planning and collaboration going forward is going to be the key to try to minimize that crisis and conflict around water. Next slide, please. So the water plan, as Greg mentioned, sets forth a goal. And as it refers to watershed management plans, that goal is that these master plans or management plans will address the needs of a diverse set of local stakeholders. So I like the sound of that because ag is one of those stakeholders. And we're a very big stakeholder. Greg mentioned those measurable objectives, so I'm not going to worry about that. We'll jump on. When we're talking about watershed management plans, ladies and gentlemen, we all need to be at the table, especially agriculture. All those other water interests as well. But agriculture needs to be here for a couple of really good reasons. One is that we control most of the land in the state. Through outright ownership, we own about 48% of the land in the state of Colorado. Now, when you add on how much we lease from the feds, from the state, from local government entities, it's well over 50%. So we control most of the land in the state. We look at water, depending on what number you want to use. Some people use 85, 86%, 80%, whatever that number is. We control most of the water in the state. And we do a lot of really valuable things with that water, don't we? We produce food, fiber, and fuel. We provide a tremendous amount of wildlife habitat, open space, etc. Some of the other things Greg mentioned. So when we're talking about land, we're talking about water, we're talking about planning efforts around land and water, which is what these watershed management plans, stream management plans are. That is the lifeblood of agriculture, is it not? So when folks are meeting to talk about those things, we absolutely have to be at the table every single time. And as former Ag Commissioner John Stolp, if any of you know John, said, he has a favorite saying on this subject: if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And sometimes, some people are nodding their heads. We know that from experience. You've got to be there, and you've got to make sure our interests in agriculture are represented. So, 2019 project. As part of what we want to do is we want to help raise awareness around these watershed management plans, which is what we're doing tonight. And through that process, we want to do some training. Now, the training I'll get into in a minute, but basically, this year's project is comprised of 3 elements. We're doing a survey, and that's at agwaternetwork.org. I'm going to invite every single one of you to take that survey if you've got 1 acre or more and you're an ag producer, okay? And I'll give you a pitch at the end for that. Outreach, this kind of stuff right here all over the state. And then finally the training element. So you can go on to the next slide. Okay, so the survey, agwaternetwork.org. The survey is 15 questions long, and it's all about getting input from you, from ag producers, and hearing the voice of ag and telling us what is your perspective, what are your interests, what are your thoughts about these things that are being called watershed and stream management plans. You can call them community water plans, integrated water management plans, all kind of the same thing. But what do you think about it? What are your perceptions? What are your interests? What are your personal priorities when it comes to your water? What is most important to you? And then if you were to engage locally on a stream or watershed planning effort, how would you like to engage? And these are questions we're not just asking for us, because we know better than the non-ag producers how you guys like to engage, or non-ag community. But it's a question that's been put to us, and Greg would echo this many times, is how do we get ag producers to come to meetings? So a couple of questions that we included in this survey were, what time of day works for you to meet? If you were going to be involved in watershed planning, in a local watershed planning effort, what role would you like to take? Would you like to be a leader, a co-leader? Would you like to be just kind of an occasional attender? Would you like to have people come out and let them see your ranch, your farm, and show them how you do things? Why you use water the way you do? What plants you grow? How you graze your livestock, and rotational grazing, and those things. All of those things are going to be valuable, regardless of how you're going to engage on this process. And a couple of things about the survey. The survey results will be released in aggregate form. No one is going to be able to be identified through this process individually. I read all the comments. We've already had a lot of good comments. I read them all. I'll put together a final report that will include those comments. They won't have any names attached to them, but it is important that non-ag folks be able to see not only the results of the survey, but they also are able to read some of those comments, because those comments are really illustrative, right? They're coming from people's hearts. This is what is concerning to me. These are the questions I have. And that, I can tell you from the 2016 survey that we did, as some of you may have taken that survey, it was on ag water right holders' perspectives related to something called ATMs, or ag water leasing. Does anybody remember that survey? Any of you guys see that survey? But that one was used and used and used by municipalities, water districts, the environmental community, the recreational community, because it really gave them a lot of insight into the mind of ag producers. So I can guarantee you that will happen again. So please take the survey and make your voice known. Okay, next slide. Oh, and let me just back up. One more thing. We are having drawings. We already had one. We'll have 7 more for gift cards. So these are just random drawings. If you fill out the survey and while you are an ag producer, provide us with your name, your phone number, because I'm going to call you and let you know if you won, so I need your phone number, your email address, and your zip code, then you're going to be automatically in the drawing to win one of these cards. And we'll have the next drawing next Wednesday. So the sooner you get in, the more drawings you're going to be eligible for, okay? All right, so the second one is that outreach component. So on the outreach, it's really, again, about raising awareness in general around the state about what these watershed management plans are, and encouraging ag producers that want to get involved, that see value in this, to get involved. And then just answering some questions around that. So we'll be doing meetings like this and presentations. We'll also be doing a couple of webinars and some publications. We collaborate with organizations like the Colorado Ag Water Alliance. We'll also be doing some trainings in conjunction with the Colorado State Conservation Board, and that's going to be in April. And that's going to be with the watershed associations around the state. There's 10 watershed associations, and those generally represent a group of conservation districts. And so we'll be doing some training in conjunction with the Colorado State Conservation Board for those folks as well. So that's just kind of an example. And then specifically on the training, how the training is going to work is we're going to try to train up and help educate and inform folks that are more interested in this from the ag community, that are familiar and ag-oriented, that have connections to their local ag industry, but that want to engage on these stream and watershed management planning efforts locally and sit at the table with the other water stakeholders and represent ag's interests. So we want to be able to have those folks be feeling confident and comfortable with the knowledge that they have when they go into these meetings. So that's what this training is all about, okay? So you can go on to the next slide. So what is the typical approach for the management plans? They start out with building partnerships. So Greg talked about this. You really can't emphasize enough how important it is to bring people to the table and get them talking about what their needs and their concerns are around water. Identifying water-related needs Very important. Assessing water resources, studies, things like that. These are things that come along and you identify as being needed, and so you address these as you identify gaps. Prioritizing problems and designing solutions. That's part of that process. At some point in time, you're going to want to hire a coordinator, and that coordinator person is going to step in and lead this effort and kind of keep it rolling. So that's a person that may come along earlier in that process, or they may come along later. It just depends on, kind of what the local strategy is that you follow. Securing funding. Of course, once you identify the projects that you want to engage in and tackle first, then you're going to want to secure funding for those projects and then go forward and implement those projects. So again, that's why you need a coordinator at some point that's going to ride herd over this and make sure this stuff gets done, because there's actually a lot to this process. You've got the grant writing, the administration, oversight over the projects, making sure they're done correctly, the follow-up, the paying the contractors, the monitoring, and reporting to the state and whatever other entities are providing cost share funding on this project. So there's a lot that goes on. It's good to have a coordinator, whether that person is a full-time person or part-time person, to help in that effort and keep the ball rolling. Administering projects and grants, I kind of touched on that, and then the monitoring and measure. And then finally, the updating of the plans. So these plans are living documents, and the idea is that through this process, you identify your local needs, and you work through those, you identify the priorities, and you work to secure funding, and then you start actually putting projects on the ground and implementing improvements that are going to help ag producers and hopefully other water interests. And as that process goes along, new things happen, right? You have changes in the Front Range. You have a lot of development going on and things. And so, as a result, you're going to want to modify and adapt your plan as needed as time goes forth. Okay, next slide. So a couple examples in Middle Colorado is one that they're actually doing. This is a consortium of the Mount Sopris, the Westcliffe, and the Southside Conservation Districts, if you're familiar with them, around the Glenwood Springs area. And what they are taking on is the consumptive use analysis of the ditch of the irrigation systems within that district or that boundary. So they're actually looking at 100 different ditch systems within their area, and that area stretches from dot zero. Everybody knows where dot zero is, down below Gypsum, right at the top of Glenwood Canyon, where Colorado comes in and meets the Eagle River, all the way down to DeBeck. So you know where DeBeck is, above Grand Junction. So that's kind of the area they're looking at, and they've hired a contractor to go through and do an assessment of all these ditches. And they're looking at what is the condition of the infrastructure, that is the diversions, the head gates, the ditches, the pipes. They're taking GPS measurements, they're taking photographs, and they're noting the condition. And when they're done with that effort, they're going to plug all this stuff in and take a look at it and identify where the high priorities are, and then they're going to start looking for funding to start addressing some of those real challenge areas that need to be addressed first. I'm told that they recently have been in talks with the municipal water providers in the area, so they're also going to be working with them to identify and assess the municipal needs as well. So both of those consumptive uses, whether it's ag or municipal, both considered consumptive uses. Now, how this thing came about is kind of interesting, because this was in response to an earlier effort that got underway in conjunction with something Greg said. A couple years ago, the legislature dramatically increased funding for these stream management plans. So you had a lot of groups come in and apply for and get that funding. One of those groups was the Middle Colorado Watershed Coalition. That group, though, only looked at non-consumptive uses. So that was just recreation and environment. But again, if you just look at non-consumptive uses, you're leaving out a gigantic part of this picture, right? And that is why the Conservation District stepped in and said, okay, we're going to take care of the consumptive use side. So they've got a set of parallel efforts that we hope in the end is going to be coming together. So they're going to have to do a mind meld here at some point. So I kind of covered that. You can go on to the next slide. Other examples is right here at home, and there's something called the Arkansas River Watershed Collaborative. Now I'm curious, how many people have heard of the Arkansas River Watershed Collaborative? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we have a handful here. I know wherever Keith is. I know Keith is familiar with it because he's on the round table. So the Arkansas River Watershed Collaborative was created by the Arkansas River Basin Roundtable. And I was doing some reading on this last night, and quite frankly, the more I read, the more enthused I got about it. Because a lot of what we're in need for right now in the ag community, around the state and sub-basins, is if we want to do something, if we want to get started and trying to address some of the problems that we have in agriculture that are also multi-benefit in nature, that can improve, that can help and improve some of these other interests as well, but help us. There's a lot to do to get started. And what the Watershed Collaborative is all about, and it started back in 2015, and they've got a strategic plan that they published in 2016, is coming alongside individual groups in the sub-basins and helping them with that process in whatever way they need. So that might include helping them kind of congeal and form their own group, helping them facilitate meetings to get the public and the key water stakeholders to come, have those listening sessions, start identifying concerns, lay out the goals, find out what they know and what they don't know. So that's going back and looking at existing reports and studies and analysis and testing that has already been done, rather than reinventing the wheel, and taking that and synthesizing that information and looking at that and saying, here's what we have, here are our problems, here's what we need to know. So this is the remaining sort of gap that we have to fill. And that's where we identify, okay, here are the studies we need to do. Here's the testing, the monitoring, the inventories, what have you. So they'll help along with that. And then going on into the design and implementation phase, they can provide assistance there and even some oversight if the local group doesn't have the capacity to do that. And then even administering projects and, say, writing grants and things like that. So the Watershed Collaborative is a kind of a unique thing, and it's kind of just getting started, but they've already done some things down in the purgatory and other things relative to free adafite removal, stream bank restoration, those kinds of things. And that is something that I would recommend if you guys are interested in going forward with any kind of a stream or watershed management plan. I would definitely plug in with these guys, and I would make use of the resources that they have available. Okay, so and I kind of covered that, but those are some of the things that they can provide: public outreach, watershed plan development, data review, collaborative engagement, and improvement projects. So all those things, and that's right from their website. Okay. So what are some of the potential benefits for agriculture for being involved in these watershed management plans? And again, some of these are multi-benefit in nature, but if we just kind of isolate ag, we say, well, first of all, inventorying your ditch system, going through and having a person take a GPS and a camera and a notebook and going around and inventorying the diversions, the head gates, every mile of the ditch, there's some value there. And identifying and being able to prioritize that, and then being able to, from that, say, here are the things that we need to work on, and here's the funding we need to go after. Those are all part of what a watershed management plan is all about. Because a lot of times, once you have that information, start identifying areas where you can implement improvements, they're multi-benefit in nature when we really start looking at them. And Greg kind of talked about that a little bit. But as an example, a diversion structure. where we also include, we replace a diversion structure, but also include a low flow channel for fish to be able to have a passage around, so you connect that corridor. And in addition to that, the low flow channel also serves to channel some of that trash and sediment around the side rather than up against that diversion structure. So channel improvement, bank stabilization, these are things that are not only important to the environmental community, the recreational community, but also to the ag community. Because when we're losing soil, we're losing part of our land. And that soil goes into the water, and it goes into our ditches. It silts up our ditches, clogs up the works. So that is a benefit to us as well. A groundwater recharge, that's not something that gets a lot of attention, but it should. A groundwater recharge is going to become a bigger issue going forward, for a wide variety of reasons. But looking at areas of groundwater recharge, areas where we might be able to install artificial recharge, where we can start using groundwater for storage. For example, when we have high flow periods, can we direct some of that water over into artificial recharge areas and recharge the aquifer and save that water for a rainy day away from the ravages of evaporation, right? So those are just some of the things, as well as, of course, phreatifier removal, flood recovery. Flood recovery's been a huge thing that has occurred in my country. And I said I'm from Erie, which is north of Denver, east of Boulder. And all of those creeks coming out of the foothills, 2013, were ravaged by all that rain that we got. So we had tremendous flooding. There's been, I think, close to $1 billion now spent, of federal and state money and some private donations trying to fix all that. But flood recovery has been a really, really big deal, and flood recovery can help ag as well. Next slide, please. So, forest health, fire risk assessment, fire mitigation, post-fire recovery. These are important. Really, when you think about fire and wildfire and the consequences of wildfire, it touches every single water use we've talked about. It touches ag, municipal, recreational, environmental, every single one. So when we're talking about fire-related issues, mitigation, post-fire recovery, forest health assessment, where we need to be doing some thinning and things, everybody has a stake in that. So that is totally a multi-benefit project, but it also benefits ag in a very big way. Water quality and aquatic life habitat. Do ag producers care about water quality? You better believe we do. It's a very important issue. And then Greg kind of touched on this, creating dialogue. This is one of those intangibles that is probably way more important than we give it credit for. Because even though we control most of the land and the water in the state, what we don't control is most of the votes. Ag is actually a pretty small voting block. And the more we can do to help non-ag producers understand what we're doing on our farms and the benefits we provide to things that are important to them, the more allies we can make for agriculture, which is going to help us in the long run. So one thing I wanted to throw in here, and if anybody knows Callie Hendrickson, Callie is the former head of the Colorado Association of Conservation Districts. She's now over in the White River, Douglas Creek Conservation District, and she's running that. But Callie alerted me to this thing called the Federal Land Policy Management Act, and it's not directly related to a watershed planning effort, but I think it's really important to know, particularly if you're in an area like here where there's a lot of federal land around. And what the Federal Land Management Policy Act says is that if a local group has a land and natural resources plan that they've already put together, then the federal agencies, be it Forest Service, or BLM, what have you, they have to consult with that local plan as they put together those federal management plans. And if there are differences, they have to sit down with the locals and try to work through and reconcile those differences, because they're required, because of this act, to honor and try to work with the local community. So it gives the local community a lot more control over how some of their surrounding federal lands are managed. So I just throw that out as something to bear in mind. So what are the takeaways we find from successful watershed and stream management plans? One of them is they are locally led. You know, it seems like everything that works out in our country, if you look through the history of our country, you find that some of the greatest institutions we have today started out locally, and that is still true today. The locals have the familiarity, they have the local knowledge, they have the trust, and that is, there's no replacement for that. They have clearly defined goals, so there's no ambiguity here. Here are the goals that we are working to achieve. They have a stakeholder group which is inclusive, so you bring in everybody: ag, municipal, industrial, recreation, environmental. You're going to have the folks from the federal agencies there, so that they can weigh in and they can provide some valuable input. One-on-one with engagement with ag producers. You know, Greg mentioned that there's meetings that we go to where you can ask how many people here are ag producers, and maybe one person raises their hand, and everybody else is getting paid by somebody. But the ag producer's the guy there or gal that is not getting a paycheck. They're there voluntarily, and that goes to why it's so important for anybody that's doing watershed and stream management plans, whether it's being led by agriculture or whether it's being led by some other groups or whether it's a co-leading thing, that everybody understand that there are times of the year and times of the day where it works best for ag. But another thing that we're discovering around the state in different efforts that are kind of innovative is, while it's expensive to hire a person to go around and meet individually with ag producers at their farms, at their ranches, it is the best way, because that's where you're really going to learn. And like the St. Vrain in the left-hand Water Conservancy District is doing that exact thing. They have a person that they hired that is literally going out and meeting with every single one of the ag producers. And we're finding that is a really, really good way to get a very solid understanding of what the needs and interests and perspectives, priorities are of ag producers. Okay, striving for multiple benefit. I think Greg mentioned that when we have multi-benefit projects, we in ag are used to some things like NRCS EQIP funds and some maybe Bureau of Rec funds for salinity control or salinity, what have you. And there's a group of funds that we traditionally have gone after for improvement projects. But what we see is through multi-benefit, it unlocks a huge, huge number of additional sources of funding that can help us achieve our goals and can help some of the other water users achieve theirs. And finally, communicating early and often. You almost can't over-communicate on these things. Building a website, updating it regularly, putting ads in the paper, having lots of meetings. These things are, as I say, they're hard to underestimate or overestimate the value of that communication piece. Okay, so I mentioned I was going to talk about a couple of funding sources. So I've got a few here, and I'm just going to touch on them briefly. Colorado Water Conservation Board has the Watershed Restoration Grant Program. There's kind of three categories there. They also have water plan funds. They allocated $7 million in 2019, split among those 5 categories you see right there. So that's going to be ag, environmental, recreation, conservation, outreach, storage, and that's both above ground and below ground. And then other CWCB funding. They have the Water Supply Reserve Fund, and they have several others. And you can go to the Colorado Water Conservation Board website to see their whole list of funds and what those funds can be used for. Okay, next slide. The Bureau of Rec has a couple of Water Smart grants that they have available, and the first one is $50,000 with no cost share, and that one is really just getting set up and getting started with a plan, and then getting up to the point of design. You've done your prioritization, you've set your goals and things, and now you're starting to do your designs of what you want to tackle first, And then you move into their phase 2 funding, which is, that one is up to 100,000. Does require a 50% match. So that's Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart Grant. Of course, the NRCS has the Natural Resource, the Resource Conservation Partnership Program grant. That one is a grant that's useful if you have a gigantic project, like the one that Greg mentioned up in the Kremling area. Now, that's about almost an $8 million project. And this is a funding source where you can actually secure those kinds of funds. When you've got a mega project that's going to last for several years, it's multi-benefit, you have quite a number of stakeholders. This project is pretty time-consuming to administer, quite frankly. Anybody that's been involved with these will tell you there's a lot of paperwork, but it might be worth it if you really need a big pot of money. So that's the NRCS Resource Conservation Partnership Program. CDPHE has non-point source funds for water quality, and it doesn't have to be exclusively water quality. It can have, as long as it has a water quality component, and a lot of things do when you really start thinking about it, whether it's improvement of the channel hydrology, whether it's stream bank stabilization, rehabilitation of floodplains, establishment of cottonwoods and willows to stabilize those banks, different things, and even, for example, replacement of diversion structures. All those can have an impact, a positive impact on water quality. So don't be afraid of going after those non-point source funds. NRCS, of course, has the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. That's been used extensively along the Front Range for flood recovery. Greater Outdoors, Colorado has some money that I've seen them be involved in just a handful of projects so far. DOLA, Department of Local Affairs, has been a big player in the flood recovery effort. And then there's a lot of private foundations, and you can go to the Colorado Watershed Assembly website, and they've got a list A to Z of all the private foundations and whatnot that want to grant money for water-related projects. So finally, I decided I'd give you a quick list of some things that are going on right here in the Arkansas River Basin 2019. These are some grants that just got approved very recently. One is for Spanish Peaks Purgatory. That's riparian rehabilitation phase 4. So they've been working on that for a while, rehabilitating those riparian areas. The Upper Ark Water Conservancy District got some money for the Hayden Pass fire and flood recovery, as did the Huerfano County Water Conservation District for the Spring Creek fire and flood recovery. Next slide. So again, going back to these watershed management plans, it's important that we don't lose sight that the whole value of these things is to actually get things done on the ground which improve life for us in ag and for other interests as well. If we are at the table, if we are leading or co-leading those efforts, we have the chance to help shape those priorities, the values and the goals of those plans, which is really quite important. What we want to avoid is something Yogi Berra mentioned years ago. If you don't know where you're going, you're going to end up someplace else, and we'd rather not do that. We'd like to end up where we want to end up. Next slide. So this last one, this is just my pitch to take that survey. And again, this is your chance to make your voice heard, and I will guarantee you that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to look at these results, and they're going to learn a lot about ag producers from this, and that's a good thing. And you also might win a gift card. So, next slide. And I'm going to leave you with a picture of the Crestone needle there as taken from South Colony Lakes. So, that's all I have.
Wow, was it ever worth it when I made that phone call to ask you guys if you'd come? I learned a ton. If anybody has any questions, have you filled out any of those little cards? Do we have any questions that are written down? Wake up, wake up.
You were talking about data and stuff. Who collects the data? Who pays to collect the data?
It really
Do you guys,
depends.
we have it, people here that are
Yeah.
come up here.
So the question was, who collects this data? And every different project, every different stream management plan is different. And so you have a consulting agency and usually engineers, hydrologists, and there's quite a few different ones. And some have done multiple stream management plans, and so there's a few different consulting groups out there that have experience with this, but it's different with every single one of them. Yeah.
So I have a question for you. If you're taking grant money and working on headgates improvement or redesign, so you're going from public money to private landowner, and that's a loan or a grant program, say it's a loan program, how would you go about guaranteeing that loan? What group, right, to follow those funds through, how does that work in the end goal of getting river restoration and headgate improvement to private ag?
Yeah. Well, let me address grant first, and then I'll try to think about loan. Maybe you can think of that while I'm answering the grant one. So
You're doing great.
Okay. So part of I think the examples that I showed earlier of those push-up dam diversion structures, I think that people outside of the ag community, environmental, recreational interests, they would say that improving that is a public benefit. And the data that you get from the stream management plan, underlies and proves that. That yes, we are talking about private infrastructure. Someone's private headgate, but there is a public benefit to improving that at times. And if it's private land and it's my private land that's eroding from a stream bank, that sediment is affecting the public good of the river and other downstream users. And so that's where the grant side, that yes, a lot of this money is going to private, that some of it is going to private landowners in the form of these, but the reason it's these specific projects is because there is a public benefit to it. I think it would be different, and what you haven't seen in a lot of these cases is that money going to, let's say, laterals off of a ditch that might be all within your own property. You're just going and changing. You've got one that was in infrastructure going from flood to sprinkler, and that was because they're managing some runoff. But in other cases, that might be harder to demonstrate a public benefit to that. But in a lot of places, you can demonstrate public benefits to doing these improvements on private property. In terms of a loan, so one of the projects in the Rio Grande, half of it is with a CWCB loan. The large Centennial ditch, or not the Centennial ditch, the Resolute ditch. It's a $1.6 million project, and half of that is a grant, and half of that is a loan. And the ditch company, they have the loan. The Rio Grande Headwaters restoration project, they have the grant, and both of those together is going to cover the full cost. And that's the only instance I know of a loan being used in this, and they're not running into any problems because, again, I think the Rio Grande Headwaters restoration project can go at length of the benefit that private infrastructure improvement is having to the stream and to other users.
Did that answer your question? Kinda?
Kind of. Specifically, my question revolves around, I'm from Orfano County, and we're about to experience floods this coming year, which are going to wipe out most of ag's headgates, right? They're going to be gone. Yeah. And so we're trying to figure out how we take public funds and help save ag in the Cacharis Basin by rerouting headgates and putting structures back in. And we can't figure out how we can take public funds and improve somebody's headgate, right? and make a loan across that. I was just saying if there was any.
Yeah, because I think you're missing where in a
We're
lot of
saving ag
yeah.
by doing this, but we have an issue because it becomes a private expenditure for the rancher.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
I think part of the issue is that we in ag are so used to paying for stuff ourselves. It's hard for us to understand that there would be other parties that would want to grant us money to fix things that we need to fix, as long as there's a public benefit, right? As long as there's a mutual benefit to other water interests, whether that's aquatic life support or municipal intake down the way or what have you. We tend to try to want to do things on our own. But in fact, a lot of times grants are available for those. I mean, if you think about the EQIP program, right? You're probably familiar with the EQIP program, right? Now, of course, from the landowner side, you can take out a loan to cover your part of the cost share. But there's an example where public dollars are being used to help you improve infrastructure or irrigation efficiency on your farm, because it's been considered by the Congress has concluded that that is in the best interest of the taxpayers of the country. So I guess I would say, if the loan is the route that you see the fastest, best way to address the problem, fine. But I would also not be hesitant to explore grants.
Yeah, especially in the Colorado Water Plan grant, there's a couple subsections, and one in there is specifically for ag, and every year most of it goes to these private improvements. But I mean, I think we can spend time just talking about how there's a public benefit to maintaining a sustainable, strong ag community, and so that's one where I think you'd have better luck at. Where I think a lot of the cases highlighted here, I mean, it really shows when you include that multi-beneficial component you have, and you're able to really demonstrate that, then there's new sources of funding that can really open up. So unfortunately, with a lot of the stream management plans that have been done, fire mitigation is not been included in any of these. Which I know there's a group in the Front Range, Little Thompson. They're looking at a stream management plan and fire, and they recently dealt with a fire too, and just and that's a component they're looking at. So that I think that's a great question, and we can give you one gentleman's contact information who runs the stream management program. His name's Chris Sturm, and he's with the CWCB, and I think that's a really good question for him. Of how can you incorporate that?
Chris?
Sturm, STURM.
Thank you.
I have a question about the very beginning of your presentation. You talked about the ag producer that was working to provide a minimum stream with the two rivers, where they're trying to keep a minimum river flow on the two rivers.
Up in the Crystal River?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. My question is, several of them, if you'll indulge me. You mentioned a cubic foot that guy might have allowed to flow. Mm-hmm. And you quoted $175. Mm-hmm. What is the rate of time for that payment? Is $175 for a month or a day, or?
It was $175 per cubic foot per second. And the threshold, and so and correct me if I miss anything here, Phil. So he could trigger the agreement if the river was at 40 CFS, and all the way up to 50, and if he wanted to, and they were going to just monitor from his head gate, For every extra CFS he allows, and he chooses to not divert at that time, it's $175 per CFS to a maximum of 55 CFS in the river. So 15 CFS is what he can contribute.
Oh, and the ditch was of that size that he could.
Yeah.
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 Second question. So he loses dominion and control, but it has to reach the confluence of two rivers, correct? There's nobody can call that. There's no calling ditches below that can use that right.
So he's
Because of his location.
Because of his location. He's the last one on the ditch,
Yeah, so
or the last one on the creek. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then later on, how is that? Say he's dumping 10 cubic feet into the river. Is there any recapture of that water later in storage, or is it just given out to whatever the call is on the river?
So it would just be going down. And so this was, of that specific plan, they were really just concerned with where the Crystal meets the Roaring Fork. And then after it would hit into the Roaring Fork, it would probably get picked up by the Lee Jessup ditch is the next ditch. And so is it going to make it to anywhere else? No. But will it accomplish I think their goal was just that one small reach, and nothing beyond that.
I was wondering whether there is any effort to collect data on increasing the absorption and storage of water in the soil via the use of the wide-scale use of swales or other things to slow down the flow of runoff water, to ultimately reduce flooding, erosion, damage to irrigation structures, preserving irrigation water for future calls, and consistent stream flows throughout the dry seasons.
So to my knowledge, there is no work actively being done in that area. Of course, NRCS, for example, has been involved in terraces, which create swales, right, on the uphill side, and we know that that water is held for a period of time and soaks in, and it can be that the microphone. So there's some shallow aquifer replenishment there right through that process. And I think that's what you're getting at is can we look at outside the box as opposed to just looking at dams to other things that are going to allow us to hold water back during flood events and be able to store that water, soak it in, keep it away from evaporative losses, and then be able to utilize that water later. I think that's your question. Now, I am not aware of any efforts that are ongoing right now that specifically focus on that issue. One of the things that Greg and I have talked about is when we look, this is kind of broader scale, but some of you are familiar with all the things that are going on in the upper and lower basin relative to this drought contingency planning. And when you look at some of the models, it suggests that if things don't go our way from a snowpack perspective, we could be looking at some curtailment, quite frankly, in Colorado. And nobody really knows exactly what that's going to look like in the future. But the one thing that is incumbent upon us to do right now is to start doing some planning to the best of our abilities to think about, how can we reduce our water? And so this is kind of related to that. It seems like a red herring at first until you start thinking about this at scale. But Greg and I were talking the other day, things like swales, things like aggressive residue management, things that hold, for example, water in the soil and reduce evaporation are going to keep our soil profile moisture. And that in turn, if we can, for example, do that on a large scale, is ultimately going to reduce, at least to some degree, the amount of irrigation water that we're going to need, right, to grow our crop. So this is just one example. and yours is another great one. That in all those is kind of, I think all of the above needs to be looked at when we're thinking about drought contingency planning and what we're going to do to try to conserve water, as well as flood prevention.
Yeah, I just want to add on that. I want to try to. Hopefully, this will all make sense. It's a great idea what you have, and from my perspective, in looking at these stream management plans and what's going on, and is that so. Let me take a step back. I think the worst case scenario that we've seen with these stream management plans is that you have a group that doesn't involve landowners and water right owners, puts together a plan, and they trot it out, and nobody wants to be a part of it, and it sits there. And that's already happened multiple times, to the point where if the critical element that's really missing in these are active and willing landowners and projects that address those multi-beneficial projects. And so I think what you brought up, if no one's dealing with swells or anything like that in any of these, and willing to, I think that if you can get that funding through NRCS, multiple sources, even the CWCB. But if you're able to, the only difference of doing it through this process is now if you're showing there's an environmental, recreational benefit to a certain agricultural practice, then that opens up new sources of funding. And I think that would be really interesting to see if that worked, because again, I just, the critical element I see missing from a lot of these, and why we're even doing this, is there's quite a few stream management plans that are going to sit on a shelf, and that's all they're going to do. And okay, but from the successful ones I've seen, there's a lot of missed opportunities, and where I think of that one gentleman I showed, Paul Bruchet up in Kremling, and I just think I gotta go find a bunch more irrigators like that, and whether it's a riffle or if it's a swell or that I think there's a lot of options here. So even though it hasn't been done, they're the first ones to do those riffles, and so that I wouldn't say that should be any problem to not take a stab at
It
it.
just seems like the Upper Ark Water Conservation District just always wants to collect as much flood water as possible and get it into the reservoirs, which subjects it to evaporation, and it can't be utilized. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
And I think with some of these projects have mentioned storage, and we think that that's a great thing to include, but also aware that that's not an easy fight in some parts of the state. And I don't know if anybody wants to die on that hill in some areas, but off-channel storage, I think, is something that has been kicked around. I know one of these, a group in the Uncompahgre River actually received a stream management plan, and they're actually looking at expanding a reservoir and using that increased storage for late season releases to benefit habitat, but then at the end, it'll get picked up by irrigators. And so where anything that acts like storage that isn't storage, that's a much easier thing to get across, and I think that
With
could
many
go
more benefits.
Yeah, and I think that could go over well.
Is there any scale requirements for these in lower end? What how big does your stream have to be to get a plan?
So I think the biggest is the Rio Grande. I mean, their entire watershed, and I think the Saguache watershed's in there too, Saguache Creek, and I think that is the largest one. Did you say maybe the St. Vrain is the smallest?
Probably.
Yeah, St. Vrain.
St. Vrain or the left hand.
Yeah.
Those aren't very big creeks.
Yeah, or actually, the smallest one would be the one through the city of Steamboat. So the city of Steamboat has a stream management plan.
That flows into the Yampa?
Yeah, that really just addresses some water quality issues that the city's having. Again, very specific purpose, and it solves that purpose. And And it was able to leverage funding for that. And it just goes right through part of the city, and that's it. And that is probably one of the smallest ones. Yeah. So very different scales.
I think this is a rarity when a meeting gets over to the minute of when we said it was going to, and yet the amount of information that we got is about 2 or 3 times what I thought we could get in this amount of time. Phil and Greg both gave you their contact information. If you don't find that, it'll be posted on San Isabel's website. And I'm sure with Janet on our staff, we'll have some write-ups in some of the papers about the things that we've learned. And I'm really thankful that you all took the time to come and be part of this, and hope to be working together with you on some of these plans with ag at the forefront of thinking about the future for our community. So thank you for your time.